Hey everyone, welcome back to the FloTrack podcast, FloTrack podcast at gmail.com. We also have a specific URL that people can use to find all the old episodes on the website. So if you go to flotrack.org/FloTrack podcast, you can find the whole library there, Gordon.
Wow, that is mind blowing that we can do that. How do we do
Very
that? How
exciting.
do we get our own little URL? We must be
Travis
big
hooked
time
it up.
though. We must be big time.
Yeah, Travis hooked it up. Thanks to him for doing that. You also can find the podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, etc., etc. I'm Kevin. He's Gordon. It's NAU week on the site, so we're going to do a deep dive into the NAU series on today's episode. But before we get going, anything on your mind, Gordon? Anything you want to get off your chest?
I thought you were going to say before we get going, here's a word from our sponsors. And I was excited.
Oh,
We're going
not
to hear
yet.
like maybe a song or something, but no, you go before we get going. Let's go right to Gordon. What was the question again?
I just wanted to see if there's anything you had to get off your chest. Yesterday, I liked how Lincoln just threw you that Eagles question off the top before he got into the rest of the show. I was trying to mimic something there, but if there's nothing else, then we can just proceed as normal and forget this happened.
No, I mean, I think I said it on the last pod. Got done watching. I watched the Michael Jordan documentary again last night. JoJo didn't
Mm.
watch episodes 3 and 4, so I rewatched 3 and 4 with her. Uh, and I think to you, but I think that Phil Jackson is the Mike Smith of track. I mean, they have a very similar coaching style that I feel like is very similar. I don't know. Do you
Yeah,
do
very
you, do
strong
you see that?
vibes.
Or
Oh yeah,
do you see that
yeah, absolutely.
similar vibe?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the big difference was when people talk about Phil Jackson's ability as a coach, they talk about his ability to manage egos and huge stars, and that's not something you really have as much in the running world. Maybe you do. Maybe Matt Baxter came on campus and was like, "He's trash. He's trash. Screw this guy. I'm the star." But I never got the vibe from that. But just in terms of how they interact, the Zen nature of it all, I definitely see the parallels there. I have a question though for you, because
Well, I was gonna say
actually,
huge stars
go ahead.
though. Okay. Oh, you go. Oh well, it's like he kind of does have a way to handle huge stars. It may not be stars via their ego, but it is stars via the outside world. I mean, he takes in Brody Hasty, who's like high school superstar, and learns how to
Okay.
like turn him into like, all right, no, you can just be another one of the guys. Same thing what he's gonna do with Nico Young. I mean, he's taken on Galen Rupp, which is the ultimate star, and he's trying to like coach a person with the ultimate most distractions and pressure. So I
Mm-hmm.
think he does know how to handle like athletes who are in a different world than other athletes. Like Galen Rupp is a different athlete compared to Louis Grijalva, right? Or any
Mm-hmm.
other athlete or that he's ever coached. So I think he does approach Galen differently, and he does approach Brody Hasty. He will approach Nico Young differently, uh, and I think that's because he understands like, hey, everyone's kind of different. But anyway, what were you going to ask me?
No, no, I get that. I get that 100%. I guess more just the idea of working that into a team, right? When Michael Jordan had to adapt to the triangle offense, it was about him trusting his teammates. I guess the superstars need to do that a little bit when you talk about a race plan on a cross country course, but the best way for NAU to be good is for Brody Hasty to be as good as possible, right? It's a little more straightforward just because it's not that there's not one ball that they have to share like there is
Yeah.
in basketball. I was going to ask, I don't is JoJo an NBA fan? Like, is she a big NBA fan? I'm just curious how people who aren't big into NBA like you and I are viewing this series and what they find interesting.
Well, what they find interesting is no, she's not that big of an NBA fan. Not really at all of an NBA fan. But
I know she's a
we're
Washington
similar
Nationals fan. That's the only thing I know about her. She's
we're
a big
similar
Nats
in
fan.
age, so like she grew up knowing about this team, the '90s Bulls and Jordan, and every time she's watching it, she's like, "I had no idea that happened. Wait, that happened? Like that was
Mm-hmm.
going on? Like it's a lot of like, wow, that was going on." And even for me, I'm having a little bit of that because the '90s Bulls, I was still very young, so I didn't really understand what a GM means, like what's a general
Hmm.
manager. So the whole Jerry Krause stuff and all that stuff, and like Dennis Rodman going on a bender for like 4 days.
Hmm.
Like I didn't really understand when you're 6 or 8 or 10, you don't really understand that, right? So I think I feel like I'm kind of watching it almost in the same lens that she's watching it. Obviously, I know more details of the results of a lot of the games and like what Jordan was, but uh, I am most fascinated with just like being able to watch the 90s Bulls with the brain of an adult, right? Because I didn't have that. I
Hmm.
watched them as just a kid and everything was just naive. And it was just like, ooh, basketball, Bulls. I love the colors of red, white, and black, you know? But now I'm
Yeah.
like understanding, like, I'm watching it from the lens of the way I look at basketball now, which is very different. So,
Yeah. My favorite part of the Rodman episode, it wasn't the going to Vegas, showing up in sweatpants or any of that stuff. It was when he's explaining rebounding and he's like, the ball goes here, I go there. The ball goes there, it goes here. I go here, it goes there. The ball's over here, then it's there. And I'm like, I have what? He could be making this up entirely, but he's clearly not because he was such a good rebounder and he got rebounds over guys who were much taller than he was. He must have had some method to it, but just the way he was explaining it and pointing around to the screen, it worked in his head. That was by far my favorite Rodman moment of the whole series so far.
I saw a funny meme of that clip saying Gen Z describing TikTok dances to millennials. It's like, go here, then here, and up here, here. Because, all those TikTok
There
dances
were
are just weird arm movements.
there were so many, and this is bad. You talk about watching the '90s Bulls from a 2020 perspective. Watching a documentary from a 2020 perspective, you see a clip and you're probably doing the same thing. You're like, oh, that's going to be a meme. Like when Ron Harper said what he said, which had a lot of bad words in it, and I can't repeat it on the podcast. I was like, that's going to be a meme. When Michael Jordan's looking at he gives him the tablet, right? And he makes that
Yeah.
weird face. Like, that's going to be a meme. You're right with the next round. I'm just like looking at this stuff, like, yep, this is going to be on our timeline for years to come.
And then I also watch it. So, yes, you watch it for the memes, like potential memes, but then I also watch it as a track employee for FloTrack, whatever. Like when they talked about doing the Indian run, I'm like, oh, it's a track topic in
Oh
a
yeah,
big
yeah,
sports movie. When they talked about how they had to do the Indian run during practice, which is kind of
yeah.
uh that's funny. I didn't know that like professional adults were doing that. Like still, like that's kind of, I thought that was like a
Well,
kid thing.
we did those in high school. What's crazy is Jordan remembered that specific run, right? When Rodman
Yeah,
comes back. So he's and correct me if I'm wrong, but that came from a modern day interview. It wasn't from an interview back in the 90s. So he's literally
no.
remembering, like, how many of us remember a workout from 20 years ago at this point? And he was able to recall that and how he told Steve Kerr just to chill, like jog, 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 jog.
Have you ever had in track practice like a time you have like that? It's basically, you kind of can relate to it, where you have that one teammate who kind of just pushes the pace too much. You're like, hey
Yeah.
man, come on, this is an easy day, and they never take it easy. The
Oh yeah.
freshman who just
Well,
wants to prove themselves.
that I thought that was going to be a meme in the track world because I think Jordan, when he's talking about it, he says the word jog like 4 times. He's like, and then I went up to Kurt and I was like, we're jogging this, jogging, jogging, jogging. I was like, oh, that's definitely going to be cut up and put in front of us for years to come. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And then what did Rodman do? He just takes off and then no one can catch him. And that's the flaw with that workout is when you have one person taking it seriously. It's like, all right, the whole point of this thing is now gone. It's
Yeah.
irrelevant.
Oh man.
Good
Speaking of
job.
jogging, you know who
Yes.
jogs a lot? The NAU
Hmm.
Lumberjacks. Because I watched them all season long, and they do not run fast on easy days. I know that for a fact.
So that's a good
They jog.
transition. The transition I was going to use was a lot of people are talking about the Bulls doc as the best doc of the year, which it may be, but the second best is definitely Running with the Boys, which you produced, which we will now dive into right now.
Yeah.
Solid number two, I'd say.
Well, we can
What?
we can give we can give the Bulls the 2020 best stock. We'll just give the 2019 best
Oh
stock
yeah,
to NAU. There you go.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. I forgot. Two different years. So they have the 2020 crown. You guys had 2019. All this week on the site, we're running all the episodes of Running with the Boys. It's 5 parts, so it works out perfectly. to run Monday through Friday. Today we're rerunning episode 2. Of course, people can see it on demand whenever they want. But I wanted just as you can tell, I'm a fan of sports documentaries. I wasn't just a fan for the Bulls doc. I've been a fan of sports documentaries forever. So I love this project. I did not work on it at all. It was your production along with Jeremy Hayes. So I wanted to just like interview you and give people an insight into what this team, a little bit more about the team, but just also into the process of how something like this comes together, because it's difficult to do. There's a lot of
Yeah,
moving pieces. So I wanted to just ask you a bunch of questions as if you were the guest.
sounds good. Wow,
Okay.
I'm what the fourth guest now. We had
Yeah.
Tyler Day, we had Emma Bates, Shelby Houlihan,
Mm-hmm.
and now
Mm-hmm.
me. I appreciate it, man.
And now we are pleased to be joined by the producer of the award-winning documentary Running with the Boys. It's Gordon Mack. Gordon, thanks for coming on. How are you?
Doing fine. And you used the word award-winning tongue in cheek, but it did actually win an award. So, just for the
No, I was
record, it was.
Listen, my intros are 100% serious. I introduced Shelby Houlihan as a 2-time American record holder. Fact. I'm introducing this as award-winning. Also fact. Give me some history here, though. Like, how is this project different than the other longer form stuff you've been involved in? What
So
made this
this
stand out?
project, yeah, this project was basically another FloTrack doing documentaries. Uh, we've done now like 70 maybe documentaries since the start in 2013. I believe the first documentary was on Cam Levin's Driven, which is
Mm-hmm.
still an all-time top 10 FloTrack documentary. If you haven't, check it out. Driven Cam Levin's, very good. So basically, the way most of these series are made is they're filmed in like a 2 to 3 day window, right? Because you're trying to um, obviously you're on a budget and you want to be able to kind of produce a good piece, but without using a lot of resources. And even back then in 2013, we didn't have as many resources, right? So you're always thinking
Mm-hmm.
about that. So a lot of these documentaries are filmed centered around like a 2 to 3 day window where you're following them during a day, those 2 days. You film both of their workouts. You do some long sit down interviews with the athlete, coach, etc. And then you're able to piece together a good like story around the athlete or the team. And while these styles are very interesting, because we don't get that. We don't get full length documentaries around track and field athletes. So no matter what, it's going to be unique. Uh, Over time, you start realizing that like with the rise of more and more documentaries, you see like Hard Knocks on
Mm-hmm.
Netflix. You see NFL Films doing their like training camp series with the NFL teams, and you just see more and more of these documentaries that are what makes them good is following them more than just a few days, right? You're following them from the start, the middle, the end of a season. And so ultimately that was where we wanted to go one day in the future. But it's hard to like kind of find the right team for that. And it's also hard to get approval for it, right? Because you're like, hey, we want to take away one of the editors at Flow Sports for 3 to 5 months. Can we do that for
Mm-hmm.
one film, right? And they're like, wait, man, that's a big commitment. So it takes a lot of like pitching. And after a lot of pitches and striking out multiple times, we kind of lucked our way into doing something similar with the Houston team, where if you guys don't know, we did one on the Houston series, on Carl Lewis and the Houston Cougars in 2019 spring. That
Mm-hmm.
video originally was only going to be a workout week where we went to Houston for a week after NCAA indoors. We were going to film a workout week, do a 5-episode, one workout per day. And at the end of that week of filming, we realized like Carl Lewis is pretty cool. Like he's very good on camera. This team was very interesting from the dynamic of the different athletes. And we're like, man, shit, we should do more than just a workout week with this. Maybe we could turn this into like a season-long series because they're in Houston. They're a drive away. We live in Austin, Texas. Their NCAs is in Austin. travel wise, it's not going to be that expensive. So maybe they'll do it. And at the end of the workout week, we asked Carl, hey, can we do a whole season series on you? And he was like, yeah, totally. So that's how that became Houston Speed City. And we learned a lot from doing that, right? We learned like what works and what doesn't work, especially logistically, how you tell a story where you don't know the ending, right? Because this Houston team we knew was good. We thought they could win. They almost won, right? They got third, scored like 50 points. But you normally, when you go into a like these FloTrack version of documentaries, you know the story. It's like, all right, we're talking about this person who won an Olympic title. And now their next goal is to win another one, right? Or you have this very simple arc where here you kind of don't know, you don't know the backgrounds of the athletes as much, and you also don't know how it ends. So you're kind of writing the story as it goes. And so we kind of learned the good and the bad when doing the Houston film. It still turned out really well. We did 7 episodes, and we learned what happens when things don't go well, right? So
Right.
Houston, very good team. We were with them when they dropped the baton in the prelims, which is a big deal because Houston was expected. They were 2-time defending champs in that event, and then they dropped the baton in the prelims. You had like the Texas Relays drama, and then you had just the team losing overall, right? Where they kind of had so much built up expectation that they put on themselves. And it was really kind of that. I mean, you were with them the final day, but like people forget Houston was like going their day that they need. They were like rolling. Like Mario Burke was running out his mind. Like they were just running really well. They had 2 guys in the 400 final. Amir Latin was running well, but obviously they just didn't put together on the final day. So there's a lot of a big high and then a big disappointment, right? But in the end, it kind of told a good story. Kind of showed the reality of track and field. Not everyone's going to win, right? And you can't perfectly predict. Not everything's going to be like we all win and go home happily ever after, right? Because that's not reality, right? So anyway, we learned a lot with this Houston thing. But during this Houston thing, I'm trying to get to NAU finally. The entire time we're filming it, back in my mind, I'm like, we need to do this for a cross country team because it plays even better, right? Because while track and field does have a team element, the ultimate team element is with cross country. So the entire time we're thinking, all right, who do we want to do? And the first team we want to do is NAU, right? We're like, NAU, that's the team you do. They're 3-time defending champions. That's the team. But there was a caveat. We're like, we want to do NAU, but we also want them to say yes. And it's hard to get NAU to say yes to things because we probably asked NAU to do films or mic'd ups or just different little features, and they keep on saying no. They're like, no, man, it's distraction. They always had an answer for why they didn't want us to film them, right? And I think they just didn't want to, they didn't want to maybe they felt the pressure of like the three-peat when they were going for number 3, and they didn't want to add more pressure with like Baxter and Day and all these guys kind of in their final years, Lamong. And I think they wanted to keep us out of the room. So anyway, I was going in
common.
thinking,
I mean,
it's common, right?
Just to back up a little bit, the Carl Lewis response of go ahead,
common.
go ahead,
Yeah,
is not common in the NCAA track and field and cross country world. The responses that you normally get are more like NAU, a little more trepidation, a little more hesitation than just like, come and film everything.
Or just a no, like we have secrets. I'm like, you don't have secrets, man. Tempo runs aren't secrets, man. Let's just like cool out. But so we went in thinking he was going to say no. And I remember I sent a text like in May to the assistant coach, Jared Cornfield, because I was like, I'm not going to go right to the boss because I didn't really have a relationship with Mike Smith at the time. So I was like, hey, man, what are your thoughts on us doing this? I'd love to hop on a quick phone call. No, you only commit to anyway. And we had like a quick phone call for like 10 minutes. And I was just kind of saying like, hey, what we're doing with Houston, we love to do with you guys. We're willing to do it in any way you want. Like we understand that there's a lot of pressure on you, et cetera, et cetera. But we also understand that like your team is going to be the team that everyone wants to know about, right? Like you are, like you have the gold of like a team going for a 4-peat, a team with a bunch of interesting freshmen, new faces, very popular coach. Like You got to admit, like, if we're going to do it with anyone, it's going to be you guys, right? So, one, you're trying to tell them, like, hey, we want to do this, and you're the best subject matter. And then it basically, it took, all right, so Jared was like, yeah, I mean, he was like, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. I mean, he also gave me no promises and gave me basically the same answer that I've been getting of like, thanks for thinking of us. Maybe, like, but maybes always mean no. And so I haven't really ever, I don't think I ever talked to Mike. So he's like, I'll ask Mike. And I'm like, all right, cool. I waited a week. No response. I'm like, yo, did you ask Mike yet? He's like, oh yeah, okay, I'll do it now. And then so I had to wait another week. And then I was like, have you asked Mike? He's like, yeah. He said he'll text you. And I was like, he hasn't. He's like, oh, I'll text him to text you about what his thoughts are. All right. I wait another week, and then I just asked for Mike's phone number, and I start texting Mike. So I'd text Mike, and he would be like, he wouldn't respond. And then I would text his assistant coach to get him to text me back. And then he would respond like late at like 9 p.m. and be like, oh, sorry, yeah, I'll get back to you tomorrow. And then he doesn't get back to me tomorrow. And literally I played phone tag with Mike for like, not even exaggerating, 4 straight weeks. And the entire time, you and other people are like, guys, it's not happening, because he keeps on. If it was happening, he would at least answer your freaking text or just have a conversation with you. Anyway, to my surprise, he calls me like at 9 o'clock on a random day, PM, explain what we want. And to my surprise, he was actually like considering it. He was like, actually, this might be cool, right? And then it became like, I first had to ask the guys. So then he emails his team, and most of the guys are okay with it. And then it became a big thing about. So one thing we did with Houston was we released the episodes as the season happened, and NAU did not want that. They didn't want people to really know. They didn't want a bunch of NAU trailers and hypes and teasers all over FloTrack and for an entire season of cross country. And so we made a deal like, hey, we won't tell anyone we're doing this until after NCAAs. And so that was good. And then another month went by before he gave me a final, because he was like, I don't want to give you a final answer unless I know 100% I'm all in. So I had to wait another month. And then eventually he says, okay, let's do it. And that was it. So I got let's do it. So it took like I'm not even exact. It took 3 months to convince NAU to say yes. So good thing I started the process early in like the spring of 2019, because if I would have started in like August, it would never have happened, because they would be like, it's too late now. We'll do it next year. Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, we get it. Yeah.
So then you go down there for the first time in August, I believe. When did you know, like, how far into that first shoot did you know it was going to work?
I mean, so what we did was we knew that in order to make it work, you need to kind of, especially it's going to be me and Jeremy Hayes. So first of all, Jeremy Hayes should get 95% of the credit of this film. He's the one who edited it, filmed it. He did basically all of it, right? So for the record, I just showed up and asked questions and was more producing it. Anyway, but what we did was we went there for a week and during preseason. And the reason why you go for a week is because you wanted the guys to see me and Jeremy like multiple times throughout an entire week. So by the time it's like Thursday and Friday, they're so used to us that they don't feel weird. Because if the first 2 to 3 days of us filming them, they're like looking at the camera, they're like thinking about what they're saying, they're kind of like sometimes even performing for the camera, because it's like new. It's like, ooh, FloTrack's here, like act differently.
Yeah.
And we don't want that. We want them to be like, FloTrack's here, who cares? Like, we're just continue to act ourselves. So we knew we needed to be there for like 5 days in a row to like get them to forget about trying to like think about the camera. So the first 3 days, they're kind of acting like, ooh, trying to act cool and just like thinking about the camera, right? But that's how everyone is. Whenever you do any Workout Wednesday shoot, the kids, I mean, they're 18 to 22-year-olds or even high school kids. They want to like look cool for a camera, right? So it's just natural. But by the time we got to like Thursday, Friday of that week, you could tell that like they were kind of just like over it, not over it, but like they stopped caring that we were there, right? They just kind of just like went back to like acting like college kids and just interacting with each other and joking around and talking to coach freely and not really worrying about saying anything to the coach that was caught on camera, which is what we wanted, right? So you basically
Mhm.
spend that week breaking the ice. And I think by the end of of the the week, we had conducted interviews with every like main athlete. So like with Theo, one with Brody, with Louise, with Jordy, and I I knew it was going to work. One, you knew it was going to work because they're good, right? So you knew there's at least something there because they're good. But I
Yeah.
thought it was very interesting how like just like the unique character, like the a lot of times you like think like you kind of associate track performance with leadership, right? You're like, oh, the fastest guys are the most popular guys, and they're the most vocal, and it goes down in descending order, right? Because if you're the best, you're clearly the leader, and you clearly talk the most, right? And that's just what you think. But in reality, when you're on a cross country team, it's a lot of times it's like the 10th best guy who's like the most vocal, right? And
Hmm.
I went in thinking like it was going to be like, all right, who's their number one guy? I was thinking like Brody Hasty is going to be like a big character, but he was just like, he acted like he was like a walk on, right? He was like, acting like he was a sub 4 high school miler, like with all that swag. He was just acting like another one of the guys. And basically what I noticed was there wasn't like so the team is bigger. The team's like 20 people. And there's people on that team who are legit. Like there was NCAA champion and Jordy Beamish. There's Luis Grijalva who in 1330s. There's a lot of really good talent on that team, but you couldn't tell. There wasn't like a separation between the talented guys and like the 1430 guys, right? Or 1420
Hmm.
guys. Like you could tell that there was just like an equal like there was no like varsity JV separation. Like we're the good guys, we're the developmental guys. They were all like on an equal playing field, and I could just tell that they did not care about like who's better and who's not better. Like they didn't care about like their talent. They just cared about like hanging out and like just chilling. And I try to get them to talk about their talent. I try to get them to talk about rivalries with BYU or like pressure with winning the 4-peat. And they kept on like blowing off that question. Like they didn't have like this cocky like we're the best like and thinking about trying to be like I was like, hey, do you guys think you can beat BYU and like or like win a 4th title in a row? And the first thing they said is like, we're not like sure, maybe, yeah. Like they were like they weren't focused on results. They weren't focused on their stats result. They were just focused on going to practice, hanging out, and having fun. And normally, like when you interview an athlete, right? There's always like you could tell when an athlete's giving like a canned answer and an honest answer, right?
Yeah.
Like post basketball games, like yeah, we just gave 100% effort. The guys work together. We're really focused, and I can't wait to next day, right? That typical like athlete speak. Um, I was trying to get them to give me athlete speak, but they just wouldn't do it, and that's when I knew it was going to be good. I knew that they were genuinely just like guys who just liked running, like hanging out with each other, and they just happened to be really good, and they just happened to be winning 3 times in a row. And it wasn't like a we're the Yankees. It was more just like, hey, we're good, and let's just keep being good, right? So I knew it was good when I noticed that they didn't care about. I know it sounds weird to say it, but they didn't care about winning. They just cared about
Yeah.
running, which was kind of different. Yeah, so
Well,
it
that's a
seems
bit of
bad to
a
say they didn't care about winning because they didn't end up winning, but because they do care about winning, but they don't think about it. They don't think about the results. They just think about doing their best effort. So
and a lot of that, I'm sure, is a trickle down effect from their coach, Mike Smith, who in both of these pieces, when you did the Houston thing, you had two very big name personalities in it. And then now with Mike, you have big name personality. These teams they're so big. It helps to have the main character be the coach, because if it ends up being an athlete, it can feel a bit disjointed. How was when you got to campus and you were hanging out and spending time with them, how did your expectations of Mike match the reality when you started rolling tape?
Um, well, yeah, I mean, I agree that we went in with Mike trying to with being the focal point, because that's how you have to do these type of shoots. Is that you can't make it when you can't make 7 individual vocal points. You have to have overarching, which is Mike, which is his, because he's the philosophy of the team, right? Um, but I mean, he met the expectations pretty quickly. He's kind of like a tough cookie to crack to like get him to like look at you as one of like. I mean, when you first meet him, you shake his hand. Hey, I'm Gordon. Oh, hey, I'm Jeremy, and like you're going to be hesitant to like kind of develop a rapport with us, because you have to realize like, hey, we're going to be seeing you all the time for like 3 months. We're going to be part of this entire process. So the first week is kind of just trying to become his colleague, his friend. And I remember the time when I knew that like he was like uh he was like committed, and he was like in and like kind of like opening up to us, was when we this entire there was like the day 3 or 4 of the first trip, and we had to go to like a football game because they were getting like
Mm-hmm.
an announced at the football game as like, oh, they're 3-time champions. And I'm thinking like, okay, the game starts at 7:15. We need to be there by 7:15 because they're going to be going on after the first quarter. And I'm just trying to time it, right? And Mike is just not caring about that. He's just like, we'll get there when we get there. He has such like the laid back, like California style of like, whatever. And I'm like freaking out because as a producer, I'm just thinking like, we need to get the shots. We need to make sure they're in time. And Mike, I'm with Mike interviewing him, and he is not caring about that, right? And he's just caring about taking his time and just living his life. And the entire time, I'm like kind of like stressed, like trying to get him to like get going, but without like being blunt about it. He could tell that like I was like getting stressed, and the entire time he was just like, "Hey, man, it's gonna be okay." And he basically started coaching me, just like telling me to like relax, man. Like and I just like felt, I don't know. He felt like he didn't get annoyed with me or like controversial, like uh conflict. What's the word? I can't think of the word.
Antagonistic.
Antagonistic towards it. He was just kind of like turned into like a coach and was like, "Hey, man, Gordon, chill out. We're gonna be fine. We're gonna get there. People are gonna be, he has a famous line. People will be honored by my lateness. That's one of his famous lines from the Georgetown series. You should be honored by my lateness. But
Kanye.
it's Kanye. Yeah, that's basically a Kanye from Mike Smith to
Or
me.
was it the other way around? We don't know.
Maybe it was the other way around. But that like it felt like that 30-minute segment of like trying to get into the car and get to the stadium in time. Find that like literally we're like, I'm like freaking out because I think we're going to be late. He's taking his good old time and not caring. We are driving into the parking lot, and I'm like, all right, we need to get out and get there because it's like, I'm worried. And he pulls up to the parking spot, and instead of pulling into it, he's like, you know what? I'm going to back into this parking spot. And he has like a big ass van. So he's like taking his time, backing it. I'm like, dude, like, because now he knew he was like messing with me because he knew like I was like freaking out about time. He's like, I'm going to try to back in with a big ass van into a park. Like, who backs into parking spots with a van? And he just was doing it just to be, like just to like take his time. And it turned out we got there and we were still like 15 minutes early, which was like, of course, because I didn't know how long football games were. So
He
he
knows how long Big Sky football takes.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
but yeah, I mean,
so
it was cool.
The first trip goes off well. I remember talking to you guys afterwards. I think I saw some of Jeremy's footage after the first one because that's where I saw that. I think he showed me that clip of you guys driving to the stadium, and it was kind of funny because he was self-aware, talking about this is the content you need. And I think Jeremy, basically turned into a member of the team, because I remember at NCAA championships on that blue carpet thing, I was doing the silly gimmick that I've done twice now, where I interview people and ask them dumb questions. And NAU was the first team that came, and I was like, hey, can I talk to you guys? And I hadn't seen them at all. I don't think I'd been at a single meet with them at all. And they were just making jokes about how they'd rather have Jeremy interview them and can Jeremy be involved, and we only talked to Jeremy and all this stuff, and it was funny. So the next couple trips, like, was there anything there that, like, were there any like red flags, anything that worried you, anything that concerned you, um, from after the first trip, but before the last trip to NCAA's in Terre Haute?
Well, one of the agreements we made with that was like a negotiation really with Mike was what the plan, like how we are going to be filming them during race day, because race day is very sacred for them, and it's all about getting their mind right, and like they don't want any distractions, right? And so we looked at the first meet as kind of like a test run of how we would interact, and basically it's a way for us to audition for Mike Smith to be like, hey, this is how Jeremy's going to be at a meet, and then you let us know if like that's bad or good, right? Because what he didn't want is he didn't want us like going up to the guys 5 minutes, 10 minutes before the race and asking them questions and like, just distracting them from what their goal is, which is to run an 8K or a 10K. So that first meet, we were kind of really nervous. We were trying to make sure we were like, that's the start of social distancing, to be honest. Like Jeremy was
Really?
super social distancing from Mike and the team for that hour before the meet, and just making sure he was a fly on the wall. And it's kind of ironic because like Mike wanted us to do the entire series without us filming race day. Like he was so worried about cameras as a distraction. He was like, "Could you guys just do this without filming the meets?" And I'm like, "No, we can't. It's not going to work that way." He's like, "Okay, yeah, I get it." But he didn't want cameras to distract the stuff, the conversations you have in the tents and stuff like that. And it's kind of ironic
Yeah.
because the first meet, which was John McNichols, Jeremy is like staying super far away, wide angle lens, not going into the tent, just staying very, very far away. And it was fine. But the thing is, uh, like Mike was like, yeah, you did a good job staying out of the way. But after you do this so many meets, right? Because we went there Nuttycombe, then we followed them at regionals, and we went back to their place 2 or 3 more times. When we went to NCAs, the camera was able to be right up with them the entire time. Like Jeremy didn't social distance. Jeremy was inside the tent during the conversations. He was like there for everything. And Mike didn't care because by then he had developed 3 months of a relationship with Jeremy where like
Mm-hmm.
a camera in that tent didn't feel like a distraction anymore. It would have been a distraction if we didn't have that 3 month of rapport
Mm-hmm.
building up to that moment. But because we had that 3 months, it allowed us to get footage of like true raw emotions of, obviously in this case, their disappointment, and even beforehand of like the pressure right before, a race. And it kind of reminds me of, not to go back to the Jordan doc, but in the beginning of the Jordan documentary, they talk about how Jordan and the 90s Bulls gave unfettered access to the final season that
Mm-hmm.
normally you don't get, right? And that's basically what we were able to do. Like we were able to ask them any questions we wanted, be just there during all their practices and all their meets, and no one else really got to do that, right? Which was
Mm-hmm.
kind of cool. And it took the 3 months of like that relationship to be that on NCAA's day, we weren't a distraction and we were able just to get raw, like he was able to coach without fear of thinking about being recorded, and the athletes were able to listen to their coach and perform without thinking, oh, Jeremy's going to see me, So that's what I thought was kind of cool.
And
It's like
I'm
the progression of trust.
and I'm thinking of that NCAA race, and there was 2 moments in particular where there was a little bit of the fourth wall being broken, where he says, "Hey, Jeremy, give me some space, or give the guys some space," but he's still able to follow him and capture those raw moments. And then the other time was right before he talks to Mark Wetmore, and I think both of those were like really key pieces that rounded out just the emotions of the day. And even though he was a little bit farther back than he perhaps would have been, the fact that he even got that close and was able to capture it added a lot
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah. And it all became, we told Mike, hey, man, you get to tell us when we're going too far, And you when we told him that he had the switch to turn it on and off, he just had so much more trust because we also knew that he's not going to turn it off because we're like, hey man, because if he turns it off, then we don't have a story, right? So at least he at least had a little bit of like understanding that like if I tell them, oh, can't film this, can't film this, can't film this, then you don't get anything.
Yeah.
There was some things though that he didn't let us film that I wish he did. He there he they the 2 days before the meet, they had a rave in their hotel. They had a rave. I'm not even kidding. So like, because both the girls and boys team, like they have like a room in the hotel that they reserved for team meetings, and
Mm-hmm.
one night he texted everyone on the team and they all went down and there was this giant like 30-minute long rave where their trainer was the bouncer and they were just the lights were off, they had all this neon and I was like, that would have been so cool for the film, why didn't you tell us about it? And he just smiled. He's like, you never know when the rave's going to start. And he also said, he also says, we told you, he also told you, like, we told you about the rave and we thought he was kidding because after he would always talk about, we're going to have a rave after every meet, like in the hotel. And I was like, no, you're not. Like, that's not a thing. And he never did. But then he does have one on the last day of NCAAs. So we were upset that we missed out on the rave. That was kind of a bummer.
Yeah. What other stuff? I'm curious. What other stuff? I mean, now that with the hindsight being what it is, like, was there another meet you wish you went to, or another moment you wish you captured?
There were some there was a Brody Hasty workout we didn't get to film that was before Nutty Comb. That would have been a cool little extra to get. We got pretty much a lot of stuff. Oh, one thing that was kind of unique about the series is every time we wanted to film something, every time we were there to film a bad thing, not bad thing, like it didn't work. So when the Moto City situation, when they went on that long run and then they got stopped by Moto City, they were supposed to do like a workout in Sedona, which is like better, like basically
Lower
sea level
elevation.
workout.
Yeah.
But it got canceled because it was a football game, so we didn't get to film that. Obviously, they had the soccer practice going on at one of their cross country workouts. So there was always like something. Then they had the meet where there was a Halloween 5K going on. So there was a lot of situations where they planned a workout or a situation that always got canceled or changed because of Flagstaff community doing something. But it would have been cool to get the Sedona workout because they told us that's like the best workout of the cross country season, and they ended up pushing it back, a week later to a different when we weren't there. So that was kind of a bummer
You guys are not.
to see them at sea level, because apparently that's when they rip it, right? When you're at sea level, you're able
Mm-hmm.
to like, you have a lot more oxygen. So I was bummed out about that. I also was it was kind of hard to like, so much was happening at the end of when the race is over, so much is happening that
Yeah.
you kind of like, you're not prepared in a weird way. And Jeremy was basically hypothermic. It was bad because obviously, it was
You talk about it
cold.
NCAAs.
Yeah, NCAA. It was cold, wet, rainy. Jeremy was not really prepared for. I mean, he had a rain jacket on, but he was soaking wet. I saw Jeremy after the race, and he looked like he was going to pass out. It was bad. He was super hypothermic. I was like, damn, we need to like get you inside and put you up by a fireplace ASAP. But because of that, Jeremy we didn't have the ability to like stay with the team when they went to their team dinner and just kind of like do like a follow up with a lot of the guys. And it was mainly because we're just like, Jeremy, you need to go to the hotel and just like stop. Like enough is, we just had to pull the plug in a weird way.
Yeah.
Because Jeremy looked like he was about to die. It was kind of wild. But
It was freezing. I was out there for only a little bit of time doing post race interviews, and my hand when I was holding the camera was shaking. Like that's how it got bad really quick. I can't imagine being out there all day. I wonder, about the outcome and how you thought the outcome of the race impacted the outcome of the piece. I've had several people tell me they thought from a story perspective it was more interesting because they didn't win. They didn't get the four-peat. How did you see that functioning as a piece of the story?
So, I mean, it reminded me of the Houston thing when they dropped the baton, and I was like, oh man, they like, uh, you just like, you knew they were, yeah, like there's both, right? Obviously, there's a story to losing, right? There's a story to like coming up short,
Yeah.
uh, and that is good. But there's also another story of like winning, right? And I think also them pulling off a four-peat would have been just as equal of a like, whoa, I want to see what happened, like how they pulled that off. Like, I mean, we're
Mm-hmm.
watching the docuseries of the Jordan Bulls. They win the sixth one. They don't lose it, right? And we want to watch it because even though no,
No
they're
spoilers.
no spoilers. So
Yeah.
I think either way we knew it was going to be good. Um,
Yeah.
I think the only negative was obviously when the team loses, it's just like they're kind of like more disappointed and like I think it because you kind of develop a relationship with these guys and with the coach, and I think they were probably really looking forward to the series, and I think the series it's a little harder for them to watch at first. Maybe it takes them,
Mm-hmm.
because the first episode came out on Monday, like 2 days after they lost, right? So if you lose an NCAA title when you're expected to win, it's the first thing you want to do is watch like your preseason workouts and think, man, go good. Like you so many like you watch it thinking like,
Yeah.
man, like everything was going so well, right? So I do kind of feel
Yeah.
for like the subject matters to have to kind of relive a season that ended not how they wanted to, but at the same, that's in the raw moment. But I think looking back on it, like especially now in April of 2020, I think those guys and Mike especially can look back at it and be like, this is, you gotta you gotta practice what you preach. Like he was always about he's not a results oriented coach, and that
Mm-hmm.
they don't need to win their fourth title for them to have another successful season. Like in order to have a successful season, they need to train with the for each other and like run for each other and put all their hard work into the season. And just because you get second, first, or 10th, that doesn't decide whether or not you had a good season. What decides now you had a good season is that you put in a good amount of work, and they did. They put in a good
Yeah.
amount of work. It's just hard. Sometimes it's hard to practice what you preach, right? Because it feels
Yeah.
good to win three in a row. But I think Mike did a good job of like eventually like realizing like, yeah, man, this like he said in doc we have a catch is like this is when coaching starts, right? After
Mm-hmm.
he found out that they got second, like they did not lose. That was a line he said right away. They did not lose because the entire time he was telling us we're not here to win a fourth title. Like they did not talk. He never talked about it on camera. He never talked about it with the guys. The guys never talked about. Never was the expectation for them to win a fourth title. It ever. Like they were like the they were not great. The grades did not result. They didn't grade their season based on the result of their finish, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
crazy to say, but it was true. And he said like this was the best team he's ever had. The team that loses was better than the previous teams, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
ironic, right? It's like how is that possible? And he's like, well, it is what it is. And it's also kind of wild that we thought a team with 4 freshmen would win, right? This is
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, I get your point about we're still watching this Bulls doc even though they win. I guess the difference is there was just so much conflict in it, and in a story about a track team or a cross country team, it's just harder to find conflict. So losing is the ultimate sign of conflict. But I also see it from the perspective of, yeah, now everybody's reticent to talk. And if you don't have anybody talking or saying interesting things and you don't have a good resolution for the documentary or the story itself, because then it just sort of ends and they're disappointed. But I mean, I thought he did a good job like wrapping it up and tying a bow on it. But how a team that's won a bunch responds to finally losing, I think is something that people can always relate to, because more people lose than win in
Yeah.
sports. That's just the nature of it, especially in cross country when 31 teams show up, 30 of them technically lose, and
Lose.
only
Yeah.
one of them wins. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also wish that we kept the cameras rolling for the next 3 months, right? Because then we could have seen the way they kind of responded to that loss with their incredible indoor regular season. That ultimately we didn't get to see what it could have become because of COVID. But um, yeah, I mean that and that you could just. I mean, you also when you're working with these guys, you kind of develop a relationship with them. You feel for them, so there is a little bit of the human element when you're. I mean, obviously, as a journalist, I'm not really that much of a journal. I don't really write that much, but as like a employee of a media
You're a
company,
media member.
as a media member, yeah, as a media member at track, like, you know, I need to go into like all competitions with like, unbiased look and like be like, all right, this is who I think's going to win. This is, who I think had a bad race, who I think had a good race, and I can't let personal connection to the athletes or coaches affect that.
Mhm.
There you have like, especially because I was on camera with like Kyle Merber while reacting to the races, and I had to like turn off the NAU producer helmet and just turn on fan and analyst like helmet and just like be excited for BYU, right? Because that truly is a great
Yeah.
story. I mean, BYU's coming back, getting knocked in the mouth 3 times in a row, and then the fourth time when no one thought there was coming, they figure out a way to pull it off. And Ed Dysone's a great guy, and just seeing them win was a good story in its own. Had to like embrace that, but then in the back of my mind, I know like I spent 3 months with this team, so you do kind of feel for them in a weird way, because
Mm-hmm.
you when you invest so much time in something, you want the best, right? So you kind of wanted them to win, as just like I guess a biased, selfish reason. So you're kind of a little
Mm-hmm.
disappointed for them. You kind of felt bad for them, but at the same time, you're now kind of like you knew that their foundation was bigger than this one loss, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, clearly it was because they bounced back and started running 740s in the 3K. So, but
I just wanted to be in it a lot, and I was. So shout out to Jeremy, and mostly my voice. So that was all I wanted out of it. It's just
there
completely
you go.
vanity for me. Uh, okay, one more question. Put on your analyst hat again, and then I'm going to ask you an outcome question, which Mike would not
Yes,
like. So
he's not
I'm
like
asking you to
outcome
go complete
questions.
opposite direction of how you were. Like, what went wrong? I mean, you saw a lot of the workouts. You saw pretty much all the races. What happened? Why weren't they able to win?
So, I mean, okay. First of all, Blaze Farrow wasn't as healthy as he was the previous year. So that he was a top 30 guy. So they knew they didn't have Blaze, but they still were good enough to win even if Blaze disappeared. There was a little bit of drama with whether or not to run Blaze or Ryan Raff, but in the end, you're debating about who's going to be our 6th or 7th guy, and if Blaze just like shows up, who like it's the surprise
Mm-hmm.
of what Blaze can do is worth it. Uh, but taking that out, because that was the only really hard situation. Everyone else was running on all cylinders. They were healthy. I mean, they went 1, 2, 3 at the regional meet. They were rolling. So there was no outside circumstance, I think, that they can blame of like, oh, bad injuries or just bad luck. Um, I think what went wrong is they were. I mean, I talked about it. I thought it was their positioning. I think they weren't prepared about how hard it would be to get in position with such a shitty course. By shitty course, I mean like muddy course where the footing's not good
Mm-hmm.
and the weather. I just think that they took a game plan of like normally they like putting like their entire top 5 in that top 25, right? And they didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
They put their entire top 5 in 40th, right? And they just didn't have the build, like they just could never recover from where their starting point was. Basically, the score at 3K or was it 3K or 5K was the score at the end. Like no one
Right.
moved. because it was just like too hard to move up. And if you moved up, someone moved up with you, right? So I think it was the reason. I think they made a mental error in positioning. I think they maybe were overconfident in being able to get to the next level to get into that top 25 group when they all were in the top 40 group, because I think they just made like a mental error. I think it was like I think it was a race tactical error. I don't think it was a physical.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think they were fit. I think they were ready to run. I think they got in the wrong position and it was over. I mean, it's the same, cross country does that though, right? The fittest people don't always
Yeah.
win. The people like Cheserek lost, and Cheserek was unbeaten forever, right? And then he gets third in a race. Like, how is that possible? And it wasn't like Cheserek was having a bad season. He was like dominating every regular season race in cross country, won Pac-12, and then he gets beat by Tiernan and Knight. And it's because like cross country is a wild race where, anything can happen and mental mistakes can happen and bad footing. But I think the reason why they lost was a mental error of their first. I think it was from their first 1,000 meters. I think they lost the race after 1,000 meters. I think they got swallowed up and they didn't get into good positioning. And then it was done from that, which is kind of, yeah. I mean, and BYU just had enough. I mean, BYU had their 5 in, but like BYU's 6th wasn't close, right? So if one of their BYU's 5, you might have found one guy dropped out, but yeah. I mean, what do you think it was?
I mean, they only beat Colorado by 1 point, so you could also play that game too. Like you could go the other direction, and is it Brody Hasty who was their 5th scorer who like leans across the line there? Yeah, and
over Yared Nuguse.
Yeah. That's the only time Yared Nuguse has been outkicked. Well, I remember watching the race and commentating the race, and afterwards I rewatched it. I rewatched all my commentary and critique myself, and I was way too cautious because I've seen NAU win over and over and over and over again, and I should have been more clear that something was afoot. Something was not going to plan, and I used very conservative language when I should have been like, okay, there's a problem here. This is not going to NAU's plan. Like BYU is in command because we were so used to seeing NAU up front early. I think, I mean, you're relying on a bunch of freshmen, although Bosley ran great, Nur ran great, Hasty even ran really well. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just an issue of you had 2 bad days from 2 guys who rarely have bad days in Beamish and Grijalva. Because if you look at like the people who were around, like you look at other athletes who finished before NAU's first guy, and it's very strange. It's like, wait, what? Yeah. That person? Like people that you would not think would be ahead of NAU's first person should have been up there. So I mean, I could almost say, yeah, part of that was the first kilometer. But like, what did Bosley get? What did he finish?
It's like 25th, 26th, 20th, some of that in the 20s.
Yeah, I mean, if you had told me ahead of time Drew Bosley's going to finish in the 20s, I would say NAU is going to win by a lot.
Yeah.
Right? And most people would have said that. So I think it just came down to those 2 guys. I guess you could throw in 3 guys or 4 guys. Like everybody but those 3 just ran off, and especially Grijalva. I mean, the guy's always been so consistent, and then after that point, he was really consistent too. I think it just came down to those 2 not running well.
Yeah, I mean, what should have happened was Luis and Jordy should have ran to the front. They should have ran to.
Should have gone with Peter Sufer.
Yeah, they should have put them, instead of trying to put themselves. They probably were thinking put yourself in a top 25 as a result because it's so big. You're in the top 40, not the top 25. They should be like, we need to be in the top 5. We need to be able to see the front of the race. Like that's what they should have done. Because if they would have done that, then just naturally they would have been in that group. And when the separation happens, they can fall back, and then they're going to fall back to the 20s, as opposed in this situation, they fall back to the the 40s, 50s.
Well,
so
20s though, it's
Yeah.
like you look at what Grijalva did after, you look at what Grijalva did before. It's like he could have been a top 5 in that race.
Yeah.
Like that would not have been that shocking if Grijalva ended up getting fifth. I mean, Beamish finishing up in the top 10 would not have been shocking. If you said Beamish is going to get 10th or he's going to get whatever he got, 50, 60 or something like that, I would have said, oh yeah, certainly 10. The thing that makes me wonder about your theory about the first K is there's a great shot from the documentary, the last episode. Mike's in the car with Jordy, and isn't he telling him you got to get out?
Yeah.
Basically, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it didn't happen for some reason, and I don't know. I don't know if it's just because the placement of the boxes and where they were, and they didn't really know, and before they knew it, they were swallowed up by the pack. But it wasn't like he didn't bring up being aggressive in the first kilometer. But I mean, I didn't hear all the conversations. That's the only one I heard, really.
Yeah, and I really think it was just the thing that killed them was patience. They were too patient. They were too
Mm-hmm.
confident in their patience of moving up because like it's a 10K. All right,
Yeah.
because I think they were like, all right, we need to get out front. Right after the first 800 meters, they're like, shit, we're not out front. I don't think they were like, all right. I think they still knew that they needed to be higher than they were, but I think they were like,
Yeah.
all right, we're going to patiently move our way up, and it didn't work because they were like, while they are slowly, clicking people off, that front group is getting farther and farther away.
Yeah.
And then eventually there's that separation, and then you're never going to close that. So,
Yeah.
but
I think we've all been in, anybody who's run has been in a race where it's like you get lost. And it doesn't
yeah,
matter how good you are, what level. Everybody's been in a race where you have no concept of the pace, and those results at the 400 meter mark or the 1000 meter mark, depending on whatever race it is, get frozen in time, and then it just moves from there. And I think that ultimately proved to be true because, as you mentioned, that first split is really close to what you see at the team score, and it moves a little bit. The other red flag, they weren't really together. They were there was a couple pairings here and there in the beginning, but you're used to seeing them either be at the front, a couple guys, or 4, 5, 6 guys right up front. Because as you brought up in one of our breakdowns earlier in the year, they don't want them running alone, right? If one guy goes, everybody follows, and they were not able to execute that plan in this race.
yeah. And I think the weather was a factor. I think the weather just like got them off their game, like just like because you're
Yeah.
colder and you're just like, all right, be patient, guys. They won't, So,
And when you talk about the weather's like a weird thing because when people say, "Oh, it's the weather," it's like, "Oh, you're making excuses and this and that," or "Oh, the bad weather's always going to affect teams from Arizona or California." That's not how it works. All the weather does is just introduce another crazy variable, and it mixes in with all the other variables, and it changes the predicted outcome. And it's going to
yeah,
affect this group of teams more one way, or that group of teams more the other way. Like it's just you can't really tell. Like Edwin Kurgat was the best runner coming in, and he won the race, right? But like maybe in a different scenario, there was a different variable that's thrown out to him, and it's a Cheserek situation, and he ends up getting third, right?
yeah,
There's just so much uncertainty mixed in that you can never really draw a straight line in cross country. In any event, this was fun. Thank you
yeah.
for breaking down all, and thank you for answering all my questions. Guest Gordon Mack, producer of the award-winning documentary.
Guys, got to watch it. We watch it. You need something to do on a Tuesday night? Watch all 5 episodes. There's lots of extras now. There are some good old workouts. It's good. It's good. It's good series. I think it's our best one yet we've done to date. So
yeah. So click all 5 episodes are available. You can listen. You can watch. Sorry, you can listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Remember, all the archive podcasts are FloTrack.org/FloTrack podcast. Thanks to Alon for producing. Thanks to you, Gordon. We will talk to you guys tomorrow.